What's up, everybody? Welcome to week 2 of class. I'm Mr. Smith again, and we're going further into application development. Okay, so the rubber's going to start hitting the road this week, and we are going to begin talking about IDEs, SDKs. Essentially, these are the tools we use to make apps. Some of the tools over the course of the semester. Basically, what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you about different tools, and I'm going to give you the basics of using them. You will not have time to master any of these tools except for maybe some of the most simple tools that I'll teach you. And interesting enough, those tools will come later on in the semester. We're sort of starting with the more challenging tools because I want you to see what's under the hood and see really why the tools that make things easier are so great. Okay, so we'll start with maybe the most complicated tools, or the tools that help you the least, and those would be something called an SDK. An SDK is a software development kit. It's a set of software that allows for the creation of applications, and SDKs are designed for certain platforms. Platforms can mean a lot of things, but specifically for this class, we're of course going to be developing for mobile platforms, and we're going to be developing for operating systems that develop on that work on mobile devices. Apple's operating system for their mobile devices is called iOS. Those of you that have iPhones are familiar with this because every so often they ask you to update your iOS. I think right now we're on 10.2.1 beta 4. So that's Apple devices. And for Android devices, or rather for Google devices, and really it's not the devices, because for what Google has done is created an operating system for mobile devices that can work on for free on mobile devices. So Samsung's phones, or all of these different manufacturers, they can develop the hardware, they can make the phone, and then they can take Google's Android operating system and put it on these devices and allow you to use Android to tell the phone what to do, to communicate with the phone when you're holding it and using it, okay? So for Google's platform, or Google's operating system, is called Android. So think about it like this. Microsoft, okay, is a company. Microsoft created a GUI, a graphical user interface operating system, to use on computers, and it made them a lot of money, because they figured out a long time ago, wow, people don't want to have to do what's called sitting at the command line. They don't want to have to just type in text to make a computer do something. It created this barrier between people and devices. You weren't going to get a large percentage of the population to start using personal computers as long as there was the challenge of having to learn to code, to learn how to type in commands to make the computer do something. So Windows was created, and Windows allows you to take your mouse and point and click and make your device do something. Okay, on Macs for Apple, it's OS X. Okay, that's on your desktop to control a computer. All right, so Android is like Windows, but it's for mobile devices, and it's unlike Windows, because Windows, you pay for Windows. Okay, if you get a computer that doesn't have an operating system on it, doesn't have Windows on it, you have to pay if you want to get Windows. If you want a free operating system for your computer, you have to get Linux, a Linux-based operating system. There's Ubuntu, there's Mint, but that's here nor there. Android is free. It's open source, okay? And Android uses Java, a language called Java, to tell it what to do. If you want to create a program that runs on the Android operating system, Java is a great way to do it for complex reasons that we don't need to explain here. So you'll use a language called Java, and your Software Development Kit is going to take advantage of Java SE 8U121 right now. That seems to be the newest one at the time of the making of this video. Okay, there is a basic software development kit that you can get for Android, but then just above that, there's something a little more integrated, something a little easier to use called the JDK or Java Development Kit. Okay, we're not even going to use that. We're going to go one step further. So when we go a step further than that, we move into the environment of what's called an IDE, or an integrated development environment. Now, an IDE integrates the features of the SDK or Software Development Kit. So the Software Development Kit includes things called a compiler, right? It contains something called a debugger. So if you were making something from a basic SDK, you would get something called a text editor, and you would choose the text editor that you wanted to use. And so I like to use one called Sublime. You might want to use one. There's Text Wrangler. There is just the basic text editor that's on your Windows computer. There is MonoDevelop, which is commonly used for a program called Unity that we'll get into later. There's lots of text editors, and those are sort of a matter of preference, and some of them have tools that help you more or less, right? If you use the Windows text editor, it's not going to do anything to help you. But if you use Sublime, one of the reasons I like it is it changes the text to different colors so you can sort of see hierarchy, and text editors will do things like complete code for you. If you type in a partial part of code, it might fill it in for you. Okay, so you would choose your own text editor and use it. Okay, but then you're going to need something for a software development kit develops for a particular platform. Okay, so you're going to need something called a compiler, and here's why. Your computer really only understands the transistors that are inside of the physical machine. Okay, transistors are basically switches that turn on or off. And when you hear the words like 8-bit, 16, 32, we're up to 64-bit, okay, that's groups of 8 transistors communicating, being in sequences on or off. Okay, and your computer understands meaning behind those different combinations of transistors being turned on or off inside of it, and those are how it receives commands, and it tells the machine to perform certain functions. Okay, if the transistors are on and off in these series of combinations, then code this particular pixel on the screen this color. Okay, that would be an example. So it understands at that level tons of groups of zeros and ones being communicated to it all at once. And when people first started using computers, you may have heard people using punch cards to communicate with their computers, because they were just taking a punch card and punching it into the computer, and it would see a space that was punched out or not, and that communicated a 0 or a 1, and people would have to sit there all day and put these punch cards in to communicate with the computer. We moved beyond that and created scripting languages. So what we could do is type in code, which is what you're more used to thinking of as people using, your HTML or your JavaScript or Java. Okay, they would take, and you can now take and type these scripting languages into a computer, and then you feed that scripting language from your text editor into a compiler. The compiler turns that that higher language into a lower form like machine code, which gets closer down to the zeros and ones specifically that the computer understands. So you have to compile the complex language into something lower that the computer can understand. Your software development kit has the compiler tool that will specifically take a language you've typed in and convert it into a language that the computer understands. Okay, your SDK will also contain something called a debugger, which will look at your code and it'll tell you if there are errors in it and help you find those errors, okay? It's going to contain documentation that will help you understand the code that in the particular platform you can code into so your computer will understand, and it might contain some other files to help you. Not a ton of stuff, and all of these things are separate. The debugger is separate from the compiler. The compiler is separate from the text editor, okay? And the text editor probably doesn't even come in the SDK. You probably have to get that separately, okay? So some people will work like that, and these are people most likely that have been working in computer science for a long time, and they might have lots of preferences, or they just might feel more comfortable typing a lot of things. But generally, that's going to be a slower way to work, and it's not really the norm anymore. People are going to tend to use something called an integrated development environment. If you are developing for Apple, iOS, you're probably going to use an integrated development environment called Xcode. If you're developing for Android, you have more choices, but you're probably going to use Android Studio, maybe Eclipse. Eclipse is one that people use for a long time, but we've sort of moved more towards Android Studio. An IDE integrates all of those features I just described in your software development kit. It integrates them into one environment, thus integrated development environment. It's going to have a text editor. It's going to have a debugger. It's going to have a compiler, and it's going to actually take and allow you to have drop-down menus and GUI stuff like we were talking about with Windows to make a lot of the things where you don't even need to type them into the computer. Instead, you can select from a graphical user interface with drop-down menus, like what we have here in this simple slideshow creator. See these drop-down menus? It'll give you stuff like that inside of your development environment and allow you to access features of this SDK without having to go through the complexity of typing in commands on the command line, okay? So Android Studio is the one that we are going to choose to use. Why am I choosing for you to develop in Android Studio? Okay, the reason is because to develop for Apple iOS, you need to use a Mac computer, and I find that most of my students don't have Macs. So if any of my students didn't have Macs, then Xcode's not going to work for you because you're not going to be able to get it onto your computer. Now, if you're developing for Apple, you have to have Xcode. And so really, the reason that Apple does this, in my opinion, and in the opinion of lots of other people, is to make sure that Mac computers or personal computers remain relevant, because people have to buy Macs if they want to develop for iOS. And while many more people have Android devices, iOS and applications sold on the Apple Store or the App Store are much more profitable, okay? So it's a ratio similar to 75% of people own Android devices, but 75% of revenue on mobile devices is made from the App Store. So that's kind of the deal with Xcode. So we're going to use Android Studio because A, it's free, B, it'll work either on Macs or PCs. So all of my students can go ahead and get this software depending on the computer they have and have access to Android Studio and use it. So that's why we're choosing to use Android Studio as our integrated development environment. So this week, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to install the Android Studio on your computer so that we can begin using Android Studio to make some simple projects. All right, so right here on this slideshow, I've got a link to it, but really, if you can just Google Android Studio and find the website. So let's just say that I do it. I've got it right here already up on my computer, and so here's the site. But just to prove to you that it works, I'll just open up Google. I'll go over here, type in Android Studio. There it is, download Android Studio and SDK tools. So it even says that the SDK tools are going to be downloaded right with Android Studio. So you don't have to download them separately and then download Android Studio. Okay, so here's the website that you'll go to, and look, the website automatically detects that I'm using that I have a Mac. Okay, so I'm working on a Mac right now. When I go to the website, it realizes that I'm working on a Mac and it offers that download to me. So if you're on a PC and you go to that website, it's probably going to do the same thing for you and offer you the PC version of the software that you can download to your machine, to your computer, and get installed, okay? So what kind of stuff do we have going on here on the Android Studio? So it says it's the official IDE for Android, and that's good that it's official because that means Google has checked this out and probably created it essentially, and you know that everything is going to play nice with developing for Android devices. So you can download it here, and then it talks about some of the things it has. So Instant Run, push code and resource changes to your app running on a device or emulator and see the changes instantly come to life. That's really great. So you can see what the results of your code is as you work, kind of like this, see? So it has an intelligent code editor. So that allows you to write better code faster. So the idea is as you type, it'll fill stuff in and help you see. Look at how these drop-down menus come up as things are typed in. That's the intelligent code editor. It has an emulator. So you don't have to type your code, then sideload it into a device and see if it runs. So it has an emulator that'll just come up on your computer and you can test run your code as you're working without having to take this time-consuming process. And trust me, it's the way it used to be, where you would work on something and have to upload it to the device to see if it works. A lot of the new development softwares and devices that are coming up in the last few years have worked around this. Okay, it has what it says is a robust and flexible build system, and it allows you to easily configure stuff. It allows you to develop for all Android devices, and there's a lot of them, people. So this is an excellent part of it as well. And it has GitHub integration, which is something we could talk about later on to help you understand. And code templates are huge because code templates give you code that if you know sort of specifically what you want your device to do, it'll have templates that you can then just change around to make work specifically for your purposes and save you a lot of time, okay? So if you go to the website, there's a lot of other things on here. Particularly of interest to you are the system requirements that are down here. So you could take a look at your computer and make sure before you install it that you've got what you need under the hood to make sure that this stuff's going to work, okay? So go ahead and download your Android Studio this week and get it started. So the article that I'm going to have you read and respond to this week is going to help you do just that. So I'll link this article, Android Studio for Beginners Part 1, Installation and Setup. So as you go through this article, it's going to walk you through the steps of installing Android Studio. And it's a pretty new article. If you look, it's from August 23rd of 2016, so it's less than a year old. And it's sort of a step-by-step installation. I bet you don't really need this article to install, okay? But it could be helpful to you. Now, you are not required for everything in this. I just want you to do installation. You will see that as you get to the bottom, it's going to start telling you how to set up your first project. And that's not going to be our first project. You might want to play around with this week some to just get a better idea of how Android Studio works, but that's on you. I'm not going to have you turn anything in, and you just once you have Android installed, you've done your job, okay? But I do want you to kind of read through this article and use it to help you understand the installation process and just better understand Android Studio. So get that installed and send me a screenshot similar to something from the screen, like let's go more towards the Welcome to Android Studio screen. If you could send me a screenshot of something like this running on your desktop, that would be spectacular. So just use something like the snippet tool on Windows or whatever you have to take a screenshot. It'll probably save it as a JPEG, or I don't really care if it's a PNG or a JPEG or what kind of a image file it is, but I want you to upload that image to Blackboard so that I can see that you've got Android Studio installed, okay? Now, also this week, I'm going to give you another article to respond to, and it's this one here, 6 major differences between Android and iOS development. This is just going to take us a little further. I want you to understand that you would use Xcode to develop for an iOS devices in that platform, and Android Studio for Android devices. And I want you to understand the difference between those things. It's very important, especially at this beginning stage, for you to understand that when you develop for mobile platforms, you have to take the time to understand what you're trying to develop for and make choices early on in the tools that you're going to use based on what you are going to be developing for, okay? So I want you to read this article, and I'm going to ask you to respond back in a Word document that'll be uploaded to Blackboard so that I can get your response to this article. Next week, we're going to go ahead and make our first simple application. And so you need to make sure that you get all of this stuff done by next Monday so that when I assign to you your first mobile application project, you're ready to get the job done. Okay? So that's all for this week. Hope that you get a lot out of this. I will go ahead and also post this slide presentation, even though it's just a little bit on there for you to take a look at. And it's got the link to Android Studio if your Googling skills are lacking, but you should be able to do it. If you have any questions, make sure to shoot me an email, and look forward to reading your responses and seeing that you're all set with your integrated development environment, Android Studio, to begin with our first project next week.